So it's CSI all over again.
It is, yes, it is indeed. And there's another joke where he says, did he have any enemies? And somebody says, well, only all the people he'd eaten.
Well, I know that you've had an enormously good time writing these. You've also, I think, got a keen sense of, you know, community and supporting other crime writers. So you served a year, if I remember right, as chairman of the Crime Writers Association.
Yes, indeed.
Which is the British, we have the Mystery Writers of America, Canada has the Canadian Crime Writers, and England has the Crime Writers Association, founded, if I recall, by John Creasy?
Yes, and all of the Golden Age detective writers eventually were members, though I think some of them didn't like the idea when it was first set up.
Well, it's always been, I find it interesting, the English version of it has always been torn between being kind of a social club and being a professional organization.
Yes.
So there's been quite a lot in the 20 years I've belonged to it of conflict internally. But you also belong to something called the Detection Club, which is quite different and really fun.
Yes.
So maybe you could say a few words about that.
Well, you're not supposed to talk about the Detection Club.
Well, all right.
It's a secret organization, though not sinister at all. Well, that was founded in more or less the same era, and that is really a social organization.
Right. With some wonderful rules about detective fiction, which have been well publicized, so at least that part of it is talked
I think
about.
I can talk about that. When a new member is elected, which is an arcane process I cannot talk to you about, how we pick them, we ask them if they want to join, and they mostly say yes, though not everybody does. And then we have our main dinner of the year where they are inaugurated, and there is a little scenario that takes place where a skull, which used to be called Eric but was forensically then discovered to be female, so we are a bit stuck there, which has a battery with lights, so its eyes light up. It's just hideously silly, is led in procession, and people who are existing members carry candles, and the new candidate is asked whether they will obey the rules, which are basically that you won't cheat, you won't have twins, for example,
or doppelganger,
and they are asked what they hold most dear, and they come up with a variety of things. Part of mine was sausages, which caused a slight silence. You place your hand on the skull and say what you hold most dear, and say that you will obey the rules of the club, and then you are acclaimed and you are a member. After that, it's quite normal.
Yeah, it's had a wonderful history, and you know, Dorothy Sayers was a president of the
for a very long
club.
time.
Agatha Christie, although I think she agreed to do it only if someone else actually conducted the meetings, and she sat in the chair.
She was very shy.
Very shy. And H.R.F. Keating, and now currently Simon Brett. So I think it's a wonder if you've been kind enough to take me to one or two of those when you were allowed guests, and I've had a marvelous time. In fact, the last time, if I remember, was at the Ritz, and I spent time doing my hair with Phyllis James, and so there are some wonderfully serendipitous moments. Well, I have to say that your fairy tale story really has, so far at least, had a happy ending, although we're not at the ending yet. So.
I hope not.
No, but it's it really, you know, it's a very inspiring tale about struggle and reward and holding up standards. And you have often said to me that you went to a killer school when you were young that molded your whole life in Birmingham, England, which was called
King Edward VI High School for Girls.
And they
it's
turned
girls, not girls.
I see.
We're girls.
And they turned out a very tough product.
They do. They still do.
And I also find it interesting that the only other author I personally am well acquainted with from Birmingham is Lee Child, who at this stage has come to America and is writing almost the quintessential American loner, Western kind of guy, not an actual private eye, but Jack Reacher, who is more like our Western hero Shane, maybe. But I find it so interesting that Birmingham is, you know, both of you are doing things so unusual, and yet within a very classic framework, and I find Birmingham must be a fascinating city.
There was a poll of people's favourite authors conducted by a big bookshop chain in England, and they were the top 50, and I was one of them. I was number 50, in fact. Number 1 was another Birmingham author, J.R.R. Tolkien.
I didn't know he was from
Oh,
Birmingham.
yes. I don't think he liked it to be known.
But Well, I'm delighted to know that the gals, one of them in fact is you, and it's given us these wonderful books which are not only huge fun but enormous, but beautifully literate and a real pleasure to read.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming, Lindsey. It's really been a pleasure to have an hour's conversation with you. And I certainly thank all of you for joining us today on this episode of the Criminal Calendar.